Hey, everybody, welcome to another episode of Life Talks. Today's guest is Joseph with Masculine Theory. Joseph tests theories based on his own lived experience and shares that with others on his YouTube channel and Twitter account, which I'll have the links posted below. He speaks on topics such as prayer, meditation, finding God within, fasting, diet and exercise, emotional intelligence, discipline, and sexual energy, to name a few. He shares his theories on the masculine. In today's discussion, we speak on some of these topics. And as he says at the end of many of his videos, take what is valuable, discard which is not. I'm confident in this podcast you'll find more value than that which needs to be discarded. Thanks for listening. Everybody, welcome to another episode of Life Talks. Today I have Joseph from Masculine Theory on. Joseph, thanks for joining me, brother.
Appreciate the invitation, Michael. It's always a pleasure when we can sit down together.
Absolutely. So for those who don't know you, I found you on Twitter. If you could give like a brief introduction of who you are and what you do.
Sure. Brief being the key word there. I'll try my best. I created a self-improvement channel called Masculine Theory, and the idea was to kind of marry esoteric practices that were conducive to men's self-improvement with also Western practices as well. So you're kind of taking the East and the West and kind of coming in together to find a nice, healthy medium. So you got the science, grounded, very rational information of, let's say, progressive exercise techniques. And then you got the more esoteric ideas of meditation also coming into play there. So the best of both worlds. I didn't want to leave any stone unturned when it came to bettering myself and bettering the men that I would like to see do well in life. I think that's the shortest and the sweetest I can give.
Yeah, and I like also the work that you're doing on YouTube. For those listening, I invite you guys to check out Masculine Theory. Helped me a lot. What drew me to your channel and the work that you do is really it is what you just said. It's bridging that gap, bringing the East with the West together. For me, seeing so much hypocrisy, I'm just going to dive right into this. Seeing so much of the hypocrisy of, what people say they want and then what they actually want, and these cultural conditioning. I'll give you an example because specifically we talk a lot about, sexual dynamics. When I see something like you have 50 Shades of Grey selling over 150 million copies, and then women at the same time saying, I want a nice guy, I see incongruency there. And I go into my own experience and seeing that, you speak a lot about a porn addiction, all these things. And I speak of my own experience of like, there's a part of us, there's that animal, the animal magnetism. There's that part of us that wants that power, that wants that control. But then there's another part of us that says, well, where does that lead? If I'm always in control, then I'm going to be fighting other people. So it's how does that resonate with you as far as, do you see that? I mean, we talk a lot about the human condition, right? So the ego versus the higher self, we can say.
Yeah, sure. No, 100%. I mean, that's part and parcel of the reason why I started to do what I wanted to do, is I wanted to be able to tame this animal, that you kind of mentioned there. I think that's the best way to describe it. And I have to be careful here in the way that I phrase things, because I don't like condemning this aspect of it. It's a natural part of the human existence. It's a natural part of how we interact with people. We are animals. There's no getting away from that. There's no detaching that. But what I think is important, and what I found most conducive to my success to where I am now, is better restraint over typically the emotions that contribute to this kind of animal reflex that we all have. I mean, it's probably not my quote, but it's I heard something, maybe even was today or a couple of weeks ago, that this idea of anger can be a weapon if you learn how to control it. It's not that anger in and of itself is a negative thing. It can be if you don't have the the mindset to kind of temper it. So it's all about how do I use this constructively? How can I use anger in the gym to fuel my workouts to new levels?
Would you say it's the awareness behind it?
It starts with the awareness behind it. That's the first thing. That's the first step, and that's the step that many people don't get to. I've mentioned before, maybe in another podcast, about how I had a friend at school who had a terrible anger problem. You couldn't even joke or jest without him kind of flying off the top of the handlebars, you know. And in the UK, banter is very much part of the um, very much part of what makes us British. And it's a terrible, terrible place to be if you can't handle people poking fun at you.
Mm.
And you could almost watch in real time as anger comes over this particular individual, and he is no longer there, and he takes a back seat, and it's very embarrassing to watch. And it's that theme of being an animal comes into play. It's like an animal that's having a tantrum. They have no control, and it's very uncivilized. It's very undignifying. It's not
It's,
good.
it's interesting you bring that up because, I have a lot that I want to talk to you about. I want to talk a little bit about David Hawkins too, because I think
Mhm.
that'll open up a whole bunch of great topics. But I often bump into paradoxes. This is like, more and more paradoxes as I grow spiritually. And what you just said was really interesting, right? Because I think as you talk about masculine theory, a lot of the things that make a man is the ability to have thick skin. But at the same time, I'm just going to go with that paradox, the one that you brought up. I have to
Sure.
be able to laugh at myself.
Mm.
If I can't laugh at myself, then if I can't laugh at myself, then I'm insecure. But at the same time, if everybody's just laughing at me and I'm the laughing stock, at see that then the paradox comes, right? So I need to laugh at myself. I need to not take things so seriously, but then it quickly becomes that. How do you deal with those paradoxes?
It's really tricky. It's really tricky. And to be honest, Michael, that's the answer to all of this
Mm.
is balance, is equilibrium, is Tao. That's one of the, and I wish I learned this earlier, but part and parcel of the what would you see logos that I wanted to bring into my business was this idea of balance. My first brand, my first company was called Holistic Health, and one of the logos was around yin, kind of yang. There are these two forces in the world, and you have to kind of walk in the middle of them, which is what the Taoists call walking the Tao, walking with God, walking in the middle. So this is the ultimate goal. This is so difficult to do.
Mm. And it's so
Um,
simple at the same time.
it is. It's funny. I'm not going to pretend like I'm there yet. There are moments that I find it, and you just everything comes together. It's very synchronistic in the Hindu religion as well. They call it that. That's what they call being in yoga. Yoga we kind of conflated to this Western idea of contorting the bodies into different
It's a
positions,
union.
but yoga is called union. It's union of those two forces. So and even one of our people that we admire very, very much, the phrase, you ever hear Elliot Hulse talk about the tender aggressive man, to be aggressive but tender at the same time?
Yeah, I
it's
could
it's,
just
it's
see
one
it
of
as being. I
those
don't remember him saying exactly that, but yes, that's yeah.
it's one of
He
those
expresses
things as
it.
well. Yeah, so it's I think going back to your previous point, the first step starts with awareness. You have to be aware of these kind of polarities in the world. You got your yin, you got your yang, you got the masculine, you got the feminine. And it's the most complete men are not masculine men. The most
Mm.
complete men are men that are able to integrate that feminine aspect of their psyche. And in fact, I do laugh at myself sometimes by calling masculine theory. I do believe it's important that we relate to ourselves healthily through the masculine way, but you actually want to transcend that, and you want to have integration of both of those energies. That's what I believe is quote unquote the best and most complete man, is walking in the middle of those things.
Yeah, I completely agree. Um, Elliot Hulse, it's something that he said that stood out to me, and I've reflected that. I think one of the things that we both aim to do is help people who, especially men, who are caught up into the paradigms of the world. They don't know where to go and trying to have a specific route. One of the things that he says is be married or be a monk. What do you
Mm.
think about when he says something like that?
Be married or be a monk. Very
Meaning that,
divisive.
yeah, the idea of the lukewarm, right? That we have a world now that is so lukewarm. And what I heard when I heard that was that the idea that you know, we want our cake and we want to eat it too, but what comes with being a monk or being
Mm,
married is responsibility. It's no longer
sure.
just selfish desire just about me. Now I need to either have to have a family or I have to give up the world completely so I can lead other people, you know, on their path.
Yeah, it's an interesting turn of phrase, and you know, I'm trying to grapple with that at the moment. It's difficult. I mean, I think part and parcel of it is trying to navigate the kind of Western landscape and the Western temptations with that. I do think there's a lot of weight to that, and I think people would find less anxiety, stress, negative emotion if they kind of opted for either path. Um, yeah, it's hard to say. Perhaps I don't know. I'm not sure if the West is quite ready to. I'd love it if they could embody that kind of idea, but I don't think it's feasible. I think to get to the root of the issue, what he's trying to get to there is that you know, promiscuity is very, very prevalent living where we live. There doesn't feel that there's much value tied to um, even a relationship and sex anymore, and it's left us in a kind of very, very degenerate state. And you mentioned a really key word there about responsibility. A lot of people view relationships like a leisure activity, like going on holiday or something like that, but they rarely think about the responsibility that's attributed to it. You know, men and women will say, "Oh, I think it's time for me to get a girlfriend. I think it's time for me to get a boyfriend," right? And it's said with this tone of, again, like you're going to go and pick up a donut from
Yeah.
the bakery on the way home, and that's the wrong way to approach it. It's, do I have my house in order to the point where I'm very, very content with my lifestyle, I'm happy within myself, and I think that I can bring somebody into that dynamic that will actually improve it and make it better. And am I ready to accept the responsibility that comes with bringing a woman into my life, that I may have to support her, that I'm going to have to be active in the relationship, plan things, plan holidays and things together, and work on a relationship together. Many people just see it through this very narrow scope of, oh, I'm going to be able to have sex very casually. And rarely do they think about the former points I mentioned there.
Well, I think what the thing with, and I can only speak of my own experience, right? Because that to me is the strongest point for understanding. But, you know, we said that the awareness is really the key part. And I think with, you know, specifically with sex, I mean, I'll share my own experience where it was just like, I, I speak often about the idea of going from nice guy, and it doesn't have to be this linear, but nice guy to bad boy to good man. And I think what's happened is
Okay.
specifically right now, we have a lot of, the same thing I think can be applied in some regard to women, but I think that when we're so nice and we get beat up and run all over, we grow teeth and we say, you know what? Now I'm going to do me. It's all about me. And I think they're, it's another way of saying the yin and the yang, right? You want to be able to give, you also want to be able to receive. But this, to me, this shift to go to the awareness to see that, you know, you often talk about projection, right?
Mm.
That you see, to go from that level of, it's like selflessness to selfishness to being. So you're just so in tune that you know, you're in a state of constant giving. And then maybe when you're not receiving back as much as, you know, is just or human, maybe you retreat, or maybe there's a wisdom behind it. So, you know, and I think that to me is what, at least what I see with the red pill, you know, and the ideas of toxic masculinity. Um, when you hear phrases like that, um, it's, you know, I think of Hawkins' chart of going from that pride. It's like an oscillation between pride and, let's say, apathy. You know, I'm just going to be
Sure.
nice to people for that, to get to courage.
Mm.
And that courage really, it's that death of the ego.
Mm.
And it takes the sacrifice of pride. It takes the, I'm willing to be, you know, I'm willing to be looked at as naive. I'm willing to be looked at as the beta, right? This is something that I've been reflecting on a lot over the past year or two.
No, I think it's a really beautiful way to describe it, Michael. I think want to reflect on that kind of transition period you mentioned there, going from that very good, naive guy. I mean, that's how I was in my first relationship. Very good, very naive, give as much as you can, but you come across overbearing, and then your first heartbreak will put that kind of defensive layer on, and you think, fuck you,
Yeah.
fuck you. I'm gonna work on myself. I'm gonna um what would you say, approach more nonchalantly and less caring, and
And
my
then
heart's very
realizing how
closed.
much more attention you would get, right?
Yeah,
Especially
yeah.
that, right? Because that's like the classic thing. The girls go after the bad boy thing,
Mm.
right? So then bringing that back to those layers behind and saying, it's not the bad boy. What is that? What is that so attractive?
It's something, and it's funny because once that happens, is you think, now I've got it all sussed, right? So you continue on like that for a couple of years, and then you realize that you're emotionally unavailable, and unfortunately, don't. Women are interested, but they don't want to invest long term in you because your your heart's closed.
Correct.
You're not there emotionally. So then you have to find your softness again. You have to find a way to open your heart, and this is the most scary part where a lot of men don't get to, is that you have to open yourself up for the opportunity for somebody to cut you again.
Mm,
And
yeah.
that's the most difficult part, the most difficult aspect of it. But not so much. You don't want to open yourself up so much that you come to this point that you were in the naivety of beginning to approach women in the soft guy and in the good guy, because then she's gonna walk all over you. So I think Elliot got it right when it's like, you want to be tender, but you also want to be aggressive at the same
Mm.
time.
Yeah, I think of you've seen Braveheart, classic Braveheart.
A long time ago, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it's there's a scene in that where he is betrayed by one of his close men, and that I think that captivates that scene so much that he just when you start going that path of like really true goodness, yeah, it's you see the human. I think what the awareness is, you see the human condition in so many people, and I think that's what ultimately fuels to go. Like it really, uh, for me, it was such a paradigm shift to go towards the good is so painful.
Mm,
It's so painful, and I've really reflected on the past year or two. The idea of pain and all that. We've spoken off camera. And this is part of my story, but sharing with porn for so long, stuck on porn. And
mm,
then realizing as I've cut it out, the thoughts, how they come up and they bite. And I used to like find other outlets, but now it's like there's this kind of small voice that says, let it bite. Let those thoughts bite, be with that pain, and it's a death. And you know, it's something that it's such a beautiful thing if you have the
mm,
eyes to see it. And what I've noticed by so many people in my own experience, when that pain comes up, we avoid it or we fight it. So again, these two, bringing those two, the East and the West together, especially the West, it's go, go, go to the gym, lift more weights, fight it, fight your demons, fight cancer, fight all this stuff. And then on the other side, I'll just sit back and what I've noticed though is, especially having the affinity for Christ as well, this idea of bearing your cross and
mm.
bearing your sin and letting that it almost the ability to transmute pain, to flip it from a negative into positive. What are your thoughts on that? Is that necessary to becoming that strongest version of yourself?
I think so. I think so. Um, I mean, I kind of think of
Like you
as
talk
part
about
of your,
fasting.
yeah, I was going to say, well, part of your karma that you're just trying to, you're here to kind of work out, is part of the lesson that you're here to make. I really see this as part of this, again, larger rationality behind the human existence. My ideas on that is purely predicated on what I've read in the Vedas, and this idea that I mean, to make it what we say possible for most people, is that we are an infinite being. We erased our memory to come here and to experience a human existence, right? To experience other, to experience, because this whole being. One of my Paul Chek said this. He said that God is a sphere whose center is everywhere and whose circumference is nowhere. So that's essentially what we are as universal consciousness, right? But we can't experience otherness inside the infinity of what we are. So we cut ourselves off from our own divinity, erased our memory in order to experience ourselves and learn to get back to that kind of infinite being. And pain is part of the karma or lesson in what we need to experience in each individual lifetime. God, that was a very esoteric trip there, wasn't it? But I really think, to go back to your question, pain necessary to actualizing our higher self. 100%. I think it's everything. I think you have to go into that pain. I think it's where you find, at least in my experience, how to start climbing those rungs of the ladder up to where you ultimately need to be. And when you do leave your body in this lifetime, you'll be content with the lessons and tests that you passed through that pain.
How do we transmute that pain? How do we, and what, for people listening, you're like, all right, what the hell is he talking about, right? To bring it back. I think when we are confronted with that pain, I'm often reflecting with the idea of give the devil its due.
Mm-hmm.
There's a reason I watch porn for so many years. There's a reason people go to McDonald's or they go to the Burger King or whatever their fast food. There's a reason people watch Netflix and binge 10 seasons, in their weekend. So you got to give it, well, what is that, why should I give up these things? Why should I give up the feeling? And because if you can't give a good enough reason to give them up, you won't. Mm-hmm. Right. So, we talked earlier about be a monk or be married or be a monk. Why? Why can't I have my cake and eat it too? Why can't I sleep with whoever I want? As long as I'm not hurting anybody. And these are the thoughts that come up with that. So, sure. Or fasting, even starting simple with fasting, what would you say on how to confront those thoughts?
I think the answer is found in a spiritual context, and you're not going to be able to find the wherewithal to do what you need to do without it. That was the case for me. So that you have to experience what I call seeing a little bit behind the veil, right? Which is, just to kind of keep it as simple as everybody to kind of follow here, you have to know God exists, I think, fundamentally. Even, I mean, you mentioned attachment to sensation. Even alcoholics, I mean, part of the AA, I think step one or step two is something like you have to give power over to a higher being. You have to accept that. That's the strongest rationality for you getting where you want to go, right? So for me, when I started meditating, so when I started taking meditation seriously, I had moments where I would frequently kind of peek behind the veil and I would become the observer. I would become the witness. And there wasn't a doubt in my mind that I experienced something that was beyond my mind and beyond my body. Nobody convinced me otherwise of that. And that's something that you're going to have to find out through yourself. It doesn't have to be meditation. There are many different ways to get to the top of the mountain. You just have to find your own way. But once you do get that glimmer, once you do peek behind and you see that past the tangible right here, past the matrix, the Maya, what the Hindus would call it, there is the understanding that you are this infinite being, right? And self-actualization is hindered when you're attached to this. You're attached to this. So when you're attached to McDonald's, when you're attached to promiscuous lifestyle, you become addicted to sensation. You become attached to the tangible, right? And if you're ever going to get to self-realization, which is God realization, you can't be attached to the physical. So you have to come to this moment and realize that you have to start practicing some of these things that get you back looking behind that veil. you know, fasting, meditation, all these things, you know, abstinence from sexual activity or watching sexual material is all an attempt to come back to this observer, to not be attached to the sensations of the body or the addictive tendency of the mind. It's all, and I know God is a divisive word, and if you're not spiritually inclined or religiously inclined yet, you're kind of, you know, passing this off. But, and I know it's trite to say, I know it's cliche to say, but I'm telling you, I was the hardest atheist you would have ever met when I was 19, 20, 21 years old. As
Hawkins
soon
said the
as
same
somebody,
thing.
yeah, I mean, I tell you what, I couldn't watch Paul Check because he just every single time talking about God, talking about spirit, talking about, I was just like, shut the fuck up, man. I'm just trying to learn like some exercise techniques. Why do you keep making this shit so esoteric? Just come back down to earth for a minute here. And I couldn't deal with it. But you're also asking really big questions here, big questions that people want to know the answer to. One of the existential crises we're having is attachment to the senses. And the only way you can have a strong enough why to overcome that is the knowledge that you are God, that you're having a human experience and you want to come back home. And there isn't a doubt in my mind that I've experienced a glimpse behind that. And once you do, they won't be going they
Now,
won't be going back.
when people hear that I am God, what is he talking about, Joseph? What are you talking
Yeah.
about? I am God.
Yeah, what an ego trip.
Yeah, right. So, and I'll share, you know, and then just push back on what your thoughts are. But when I hear you say this idea of I am God, when the ego says it, horrible.
Yeah.
Because then I am, and then it's all about me. But what I hear you when you say that is, do you have the courage to say that honestly?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I think those who, you know, because one person can say it and another person can say, how do you know which one? One pastor can, and now, and similar to you, if you 5 years ago, 10 years ago, you'd think I'd be making videos talking about Christ so much more. I'd say you're crazy, but
Mm-hmm.
I'm seeing it now because one
Mm-hmm.
person says, praise Jesus, and I'm just shut off. And another
Yeah.
person says, I just saw a TikTok video pop up. And this guy's like, how do you get a one night stand? I'll send it to you if you haven't seen it. How do you get this one night stand? He says back to him, he goes, you don't need a one night stand. He says, repent and seek the gospel.
I've seen it. I've seen it.
And
Great.
it's yeah,
Brilliant.
it's
Gives you hope
followed.
again.
Yeah, but what was so cool about it was that I see there was life in that guy's face. It wasn't a fakeness. It wasn't like repent and find Jesus. It was just, bro, seek God first, and you'll be taken care of. You'll be taken care of with a beautiful wife, with a family, with whatever you deep down really want. You know, and I think this is this other idea of the paradox that I found in my life as well, is this, you know, seek first the kingdom of heaven and
Mm-hmm.
everything else will be given to you. So when we seek the sex, or we seek, you know, food or the material, as the matrix Maya,
Mm-hmm.
we become more bound to it. But when we seek that behind it, like as you've
Yeah.
said, we get all of those things, and we get them at the
100%.
right time when we need it. And it's such a, you know, as much as I say that right now, I say it, it just sounds like such gold when I say it, but living it, there's still a part of me that's
Yeah.
still disconnected from that. And as you said earlier, right, it's still on that path. And that's the human condition, right? That's, you know, I guess the fact that we are even having this conversation, you know, makes me think of like what, you know, when Christ says, when two are speaking in my name, you know, I am there, or something along those lines of that quote, is that it's when we're speaking about this, we're having this conversation, we're bringing that kingdom of heaven in my view, because it's
100%.
realized, it's a way of seeing that world.
Mm. And I love how you started that off, because, you know, many people will attribute that to being spoken at the level of the ego. I am God, you know, and you get wrapped up in identity. I mean, that's one of the biggest problems today, is that people are so wrapped up in identity and personal perception of things. When I say I am God, I'm trying the best I can to speak it at the level of that witness, of that observer. You know, the Hindus call it the Atman. You can call it the, you know, the Christian soul. You know, you can call it Christ within. You know, that's those are the moments when I talk about peeking behind the veil, and I'm there. I'm trying to bring that presence with me everywhere I go. You know, and that's what I mean when I say that I am God, and you're God too. You just haven't realized it yet. You're
Yeah.
too attached to ego that you won't see it. You won't see it.
A little test, a little a not test, but a little experiment that I'd always do is every time God, that word God comes in, I'd replace it with truth, right? Because it's been said that God is truth.
Mm.
So can you say I am truth? Can you say that unapologetically? And then, what I've realized, I don't know if you're familiar, but there's, when they read from the gospel in certain sections of, I'm not sure if it's Christianity, but at least with being raised Roman Catholic, they press for the head, the lips, and the heart.
Hmm.
And it wasn't until the past few years ago, when I started going within and saying, hey, what is, looking back from church and all the different ceremonies, that made so much sense because we think one thing, we're saying another thing, and we're feeling a third thing. How many of us can say authentically that we're thinking, feeling, and saying, and we're doing that all the time? And I think that practice of doing that, when you're actually doing that, the Holy Spirit is working through you.
Hmm.
But we're thinking one thing, oh, I don't want my boss to think this, or feeling one thing, I can't say this because then that person's not going to like me, and we're so disconnected that we have to almost like practice being holy
Hmm. 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 Yeah, it's difficult. I mean, you've quoted many times it's to live in the world but be not of it.
again.
No. And it all ties back to this premise of attachment, you know. Often because I am, a big proponent of meditation, because I believe that the most important for me to do every single day is center myself back into that acknowledgement. Everything that we've spoken about for the last 10 minutes or 15 minutes or so is that realizations of pure presence of being the Christ within. And that's why those moments of meditation are so precious for me, because it is the highest truth. You mentioned truth. It is truth, and I'm trying to center myself in truth every single part of the day. But I still got to live in this world. I still got to live here, and that's the challenge. Is how do I bring that truth with me? And I think that's a great example of how can I think that truth, how can I speak that truth and feel that truth in all aspects of my life. The way I kind of approach it is, how do I make everything I'm doing a meditation? When I'm getting out of bed in the morning, can I meditate? When I'm walking to the gym in the morning, can I just meditate? Can I be in that kind of in that consciousness of Christ? When I'm lifting weights, when I'm breaking my fast, when I'm speaking to my family, how can I just keep myself centered in that witness? And there are many saints that have been able to keep that and transcend even themselves, leave their body. Not quite there yet. I don't think we're quite there yet.
Um, one of the things that I think one of the biggest reasons I came across you, I think was, again, it was me stuck in porn for so long, and it's taken me a while now. Excuse me, I just gotten off sick, but it's taken me a while now to get to this place where it's not living as this victim. Oh, look at me, I'm this addict,
Hmm.
and but at the same time, being at a place like this is part of my story. This was part of, I had to screw up and do stupid shit in order to. I had to bash my head against the wall and say, "Hey, maybe I should stop doing that." Right.
Hmm.
And when you see most of the world continuing to do that anyway and say, "Oh, it's normal." I bash my head against the wall every single day and saying, "Oh, they're crazy and they
Hmm.
actually need help too." And you know, maybe if you could share, because I think my goal with this conversation is to find like-minded men who are saying, Mike, I see what you're talking about. I see how it's really not helping me, but I can't stop. And it's something that is, I think it's still somewhat socially acceptable. We're in the Twitter sphere. We
Hmm.
can see almost there's like a million posts now, at least what I see in our feed, and that's just my own subjective reality, right? I can't speak for others, but stop watching porn. Porn is electronic cuckoldry, all these different things that people say. Um, but my mission is to speak to people who are silently, they got their lives together, but it's just a vice on the side. What would you tell people, you know, how to why is porn so destructive?
Hmm. I was hosting a Discord lecture the other day for some of my followers, and a question came up very similar with this particular individual. Of course, I won't name him, but he was, he's trying to quit, but again, he's kind of like silently suffering here, and essentially what the answer is, and my kind of quick, go to was that you don't want it enough, and if you were truly, it goes back to your point of paradoxes. Ultimately, we have been conditioned. There is a social conditioning that this is something that should be, permissible in life. It's just part of the human existence. Men watch pornography and jerk off to pornography. That's just something that you have to accept. Why? Nobody's supposed to question that particular aspect. But the reality is, one of the reality is, and one of the parts that helped me quit was knowing that most adult I was going to say, film stars, like it's something to be proud of, but are the product of pedophilia and sexual assault. Most of them, and to watch pornography is to be complicit in that. And I think very long, a couple of years ago, like I watched like an interview of like a former performer, and seeing the history of what can literally bring somebody to their knees to a point where they're doing that kind of creating that kind of content is horrible. It left a real kind of impression upon me. And I can't even watch that material by thinking, oh, there's a woman that's been a product of maybe domestic abuse or violence or rape or pedophilia, and am I really going to sit here and entertain that? Am I really going to do that? So there isn't a doubt in my mind that, well, there isn't any temptation for me now to go back to something like that. So to go back to your question, the answer is you have to undo this brainwashing that what you are doing is something that you give up. Even the idea is something that you give up has connotations that it's something good, like giving up chocolate, like giving up sugar. Oh, I love my chocolate. I love my sugar. Oh, I don't want to give up my pornography, my sweet, sweet pornography. Get that shit idea out of your head. It's whack. It's absolutely whack. You're not giving up something that is bringing you pleasure. You're giving up something that is a drip feed of poison into your veins, into your mind, right? And, I know I'm going, pretty hard on this perspective here, but this is something that you're going to have to find out for yourself if you're not there yet. I wasn't there yet, by the way. There was when I first heard of like NoFap and semen retention, I laughed myself to death. I laughed myself to death. Couldn't believe it. Was sharing to my friend. Can you believe these guys are not jerking off? How weird are they? Not jerking off.
Yep.
And it's funny how things come around. If
Well,
you're not
I
getting
think
the results you want.
yeah, there's paradoxes in that as well, right? Because I went through a phase where it's just like I was counting the, and this because I see so many different takes on this, so I think this would be a really really good topic. I would count the days, right? Oh, no fat for this many days, and I think everybody has to walk their own path. I think if you're someone who has totally been blinded by it, maybe that's for years, maybe that's a path you start out with, just tracking the days, building that, and then Hawkins has a thing where he says, if you're, what is it, the Heisenberg principle? Might have to do a video on that. It's this idea that, are you familiar with it or?
Remind me. The name is coming up, but
yeah, it's the idea that you don't, let's say you have a cookie problem, you eat all the cookies, right? Today you ate 30 cookies. You don't say, I got to stop eating cookies. You just start writing down how many cookies you're eating, right? And you just mark it. And the idea is the awareness of it. So,
sure.
So you just become aware of, what your actions are, write it down, and then you can kind of see it for what it is, without the judgment with it. Because I think guilt and shame can continue to repeat those processes. But the idea is that there's so many people, I think they say, oh, I'm doing the semen retention. The ego just slips right in. Nat, what do you think? You're better than everybody because you didn't bust a nut in, 300 days? Good for you. But if you're proud of that, right, that it's not something to be, it's almost like it's just seeing it for what it is. That's really, I think, the goal. It is your life force. It is meant to impregnate and, to create another human being. That's its purpose,
Mhm.
right? And we've taken that and said that's the we separate, but we just want the feeling of that and not the responsibility. And it's not even. And now you see all these political things, abortion, anti-abortion. We're forgetting what it is, and we're saying no, forget. We just want the feeling and no
Mhm.
responsibility of those things. And yeah, I'm going off a little on the tangent now, but to bring it back, maybe to turn this into a question for you, how do you semen retention, all these things, how do we is it just a matter of experimenting for yourself? Is it practicing? Because I think, at least from what I've seen, I think one of the biggest turnoffs from a lot of people, from the feedback that I'm seeing, is that it becomes almost like a contest. It becomes almost like a club. I'm
Mhm.
part of the no fap club. It's like that's
Mhm.
not that to me. That's not the purpose. It should be something to experiment and see for yourself and grow in it and be honestly communicating about it and really honestly communicating about it. Because I'm a man. You put up a post all the time. Being horny makes you powerful. Man should be strong. It should have that vital essence. We are meant to be horny, but not always act on it like a brutal animal, not like a dumb man. It's this powerful energy. It's a creative force,
Mhm.
and we want to generate that. That we're, So I
Yeah,
guess
no,
no question there, but just to throw it out.
I get the vein of the thought that you're walking down here, but yeah, it's true. I mean, even sometimes, I mean, I know I am heavy on the subject, and sometimes I don't like to be, just because I feel like it turns into that. It turns into a competition. I see the comments all the time, or day 43, day, 90, whatever the case may be. And the main lesson that you need to learn is that this is a tool for you to be able to get to where you want to go. And if you keep I mean, I'm thinking of, I'm not sure if it was Bruce Lee or it was somebody else, but they were saying something to the affinity of, if I'm pointing like at the moon, right?
Oh
You heard
yeah,
this one,
yeah.
yeah? It's like I'm pointing at the moon. I'm showing you how beautiful, your life is without pornography, how you feel more whole, how you can talk to women better, and all of that. This is all the beauty and the splendor here. But you're focusing too much on me pointing at the moon, right? Like the semen retention and OFAP, whatever you want to call it, it's just the system in order for you to get to where you want to go. But if you keep focus on me, you're going to miss the beauty of making the days count rather than counting the days. And that's also why I don't like to count days, is because it also comes from the perspective of somebody who is waiting to fail. So I mean, it's like with anything. If you don't smoke, there is no reason for you to keep counting the days that you don't smoke. You don't smoke. That's the identity that you have, you know? So I think you're 100% right. I think there is something kind of cult and club like about it. And, whilst I believe maybe that's somebody's process for getting to where they want to go, and I wouldn't, I would say to even make that step first and foremost, congratulations, you're looking in the right areas that are going to improve your life, but don't get attached to it. Don't get attached. It's a system to get the life that you want to live ultimately. And coming back to truth. That's been a theme in our discussions. It's the truth of self-actualization. And if you're constantly smashing your head against the wall and counting your days, that is going to be a hindrance to that truth. It's another form of attachment. So it's another paradox.
Yeah, I was just listening. I believe it was Ram Dass who said that you're closer to God not when you're a horny celibate, but
Mhm,
when you're honest about your lust
mhm,
and you're honest about where you're at. I feel like, at least for me, that's where I'm at. I went through, and the reason I bring this up, because again, everybody's going to be at a different point. Everybody's going to have different solutions on how they get, to the right way. I think another way, maybe push back on this is, I often hear, if you're anxious or if you're having do it more. See if it brings you fulfillment. Right?
mhm,
It's the way of no way. To say to one person, they say, maybe you need to just keep watching porn. Do you feel
mhm.
fulfillment? Are you honest with yourself? Keep doing what you're doing. Is it
Sure.
bringing you the life that you want? Because I think deep down in my heart, knowing my own experience, it doesn't bring that fulfillment. And people know that deep down. And that might not be what other people need to hear. Another person needs tough love, and that's how they're
Sure.
going to respond to it.
No. I like that you brought that up because you know, it's another very powerful method to actually bring more consciousness, awareness, and energy to that particular issue. And again, rationalize is bringing you fulfillment. Stephen Carr, I'm not sure if you're familiar with Stephen Carr. He wrote a lot of uh, methods to quit addictive habits. He had one on smoking. And I've never been addicted to smoking, but I just read it because I was curious because it has so many good reviews. And one of the one of the one of the points of the book is that whilst you're reading the book, don't attempt to stop smoking. He says, I want you to keep smoking as you're reading this book, right? I'm just trying to bring your attention awareness to all these very rational and logical points that I will be making whilst you're smoking. And what happens, and I've seen a couple interviews of people who have read the book, is that you begin to tie the pieces of information to, you know, that the habit you have, and he basically just very simply, very calmly, very logically just dismantles your chain of logic for why you want to do this. And the last thing you want to do at the end is pick up another cigarette because it just makes no sense. um and it all starts by, again, bringing that awareness to what you're doing when you're doing, because most people use these vices as a form of escapism. They don't want to be here, they want to be in the body, they want to get the sensation. I want to feel good, I want to feel good, I want that nicotine
And
hit,
have
I want that dopamine
forgotten
hit.
that it's that they have escaped. It's become a
Yeah,
habit at that point that they don't even realize. So when you say
yeah, they're on
you're doing it to
autopilot, they don't
escape,
even think about it.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
because
So
that's what that was
it's a
for
great
me
way.
with the porn. I had to really go back in time to say, hey, you know what? Oh, this was I did it. I would escape in these moments, and then at this point later in my life, where we're just like, oh, I thought it was just a habit. It was just like, no, that's that's what you do before you go to bed, or that's what it's so it, because the ego wants the ego is opposed to the truth. So when you start shedding that truth, on it, that's why I think so many people are they'll be very quick to deny it. And that other people, we are other people, right? So understand that's why the importance of going within. And I think it's really cool too, as what you basically to reflect back what I was saying as well with what's his name again, Carr?
His name is Stephen Carr.
Stephen
Stephen
Carr.
Carr.
The idea that if you lost my train of thought. If you lost my train of thought.
Talking about Stephen Carr.
Stephen Carr, bring me back here.
I think I've lost where we are as well.
Oh, I remember. Excuse me. This right here is motivation to start a podcast, because if I'm going to lose my place right here, get in the arena, right? But what I found interesting, this was the main point I wanted to get to, was the guilt and shame aspect, I think, is a big thing that turns off a lot of people with all this, right? Who are you to judge me and all that? And oh yeah, so looking into other people, you're looking into yourself. So, I found the enemy is I, right? To love your enemy, you have to love yourself and see the enemy within yourself, and then see that within other people. So, it's really, as you've said too before, it's the projection. When you realize everything is a projection, you've said that to me before, and because I've asked your views, because, as we were speaking earlier in this, like when I'm on Twitter, when I'm on social media, I take things to heart. I take tweets as if they're speaking it to me. And then I take them, or I'm completely cold to them. That's their projection. And then I try to be in this place of neutrality where it's like, what is truth? And separating it, and the things that I'll take personally, let them kill that which is personal. Let those emotions come up. Let those thoughts come up. We're one big team. We need to see it as that. But going back to the guilt and shame, I'm interested in your thoughts on this. Like, to me, I think we have become, in some sense, a shameless society, but we don't have a sense of shame, and we have seen shame and guilt as if it's this bad thing. I don't think guilt and shame are bad. I
Mm.
think they are necessary. I think living there and keeping people there is, for lack of a better word, bad. It's not natural. It's not, it's keeping the ball underwater. And I think, again, I think for anybody who's struggling with alcohol or sex or whatever the vice is, to not, it's to build a relationship with shame and guilt. Let
I
those
agree.
feelings be there, right? And but how to, it's almost how to use them. Like how
Mm,
to say, hey, you know what? I should look in the mirror. You should feel shame and guilt. You know, that
mm.
can be a wake-up call, but it's very tricky because people don't want shame and guilt. And I think we're seeing
Well,
that now with, pride, right? The idea of pride. When we're confronted with shame or guilt, either we go pride or courage to sacrifice that
sure,
little.
sure. So what I've typically found is one of the reasons to the what would you say, actualization or let's say reintegration of some of that shame and guilt is they've just built up so much baggage and it becomes this horrible monster under your bed and you can't and you don't want to deal with it. The first time I did David Hawkins's letting go meditation, I sat for about an hour, just unpicking things out myself, shame, guilt, apathy, depression, fear, all those negative emotions that I just kind of squashed down because I told myself I don't want to deal with that stuff yet, right? It's cleaning out your closet. That's what you have to do. You have to be willing to sit there and you have to ask yourself the question is what part of me is feeling, am I feeling shame in this particular vice? Yes, I am feeling shame. You'll get a physical reaction with this as well. This is what Hawkins says. And, this isn't some airy fairy esoteric concept. I'm saying that when you do a letting go meditation, there will be a physiological response. I felt tightness in my chest and my heart start to relax, like muscles in my chest and my heart relax. I started to feel, the tightness and the cramps in my belly and my internal organs relax as I started letting go of these emotions. Emotions will be trapped in your body. The body holds the score for all of these things, right? So once you start doing that, it is amazing how much physically lighter you will feel. And usually people are trapped in this, vicious cycle of, let's say, PMO, is because they're not letting go of the energy that is contributing to it. It just becomes this cycle. So you have to be willing to do the deep work and look at yourself in the mirror and ask yourself the question: are you feeling shameful? Are you feeling guilty? Are you in apathy? And unpack it. It is going to be a long process. You'll cry your eyes out, you bawl your eyes out. Because it's a big energetic release, and you have to do that.
Mm.
But that's it's very cathartic in that way, and not people are willing to do that. Not many people are willing to again look in. I mean, I can only liken it to your messy bedroom. I mean, if you've just been chucking clothes in the back of your closet for so long, it just becomes to a point you just, I don't want to fucking deal with that shit, man. I've been chucking stuff behind there for years and years and years, and it's dusty there, and there's cobwebs there, and there's probably some, like, rotten food, and there's starting to smell. I don't want to like undo that. I don't want to get all that shit out. You have to, or you're gonna keep living in this kind of messy, rotten organism that's just waiting to explode at any given time. And yeah, of course it's hard, but you have to do
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. And then the second part becomes, as at least what I've been reflecting on too, is this idea that we need to be able to hold other people accountable too, and it's tricky because when you, if you, am I shaming or guilting my friends and family? Or
Hmm.
my question, because when you ask a question, I think that I put a tweet out a while back. It's apathy is often disguised as neutrality.
Okay.
So people say, I just don't want to even fight. I don't even want to get involved. I'd rather
Hmm.
not talk about politics. I don't want to talk about religion. Is it wise? Is it just in one situation, or are you avoiding to talk about that? And I think that I'm part of a couple of men's groups right now, and that's a common theme, right? How do we hold a candle to other people? Well, we spark those feelings of, guilt and shame in other people, or you know, not pre not doing it intentionally. Like I'm going to inflict guilt and
Mhm,
shame in somebody, but being able to neutrally ask questions, hold the
mhm.
mirror up to somebody else. And you know yourself so well that you know that that's going to bring up those feelings in those other people, and to do it in a way where you burn that negative part of them and leave them intact.
Mm.
And I think
That's
that, yeah, I think that's something that's necessary because in my experience, I would talk to my friends and family about this stuff, and a lot of my friends would give me the feedback, for example, on porn, that it's not a big deal, dude. As long as it
mm,
just doesn't. And it's like they were right on their level of truth,
mhm,
as long as it doesn't become a big problem. But they were wrong in the sense that it's not our highest, but the highest version of ourselves doesn't watch
mhm.
porn, and to be able to invite shame and guilt, invite those so that they can bring up some sort of conflict that says, sometimes a fight can be a good thing, but it's not. Does that resonate with you? It's not
Yeah,
like
no,
a
100%. And
big
I
deal.
think that's a your pitch is important there, and I like how you kind of gave the examples that this isn't coming from a place of you don't want to be punitive. You just want to be asking people the right questions, and that's a great way to ask it. And as often the way I asked it is, do you think the best version of you is watching pornography? I'm not saying that the best version of you doesn't watch pornography. I'm just asking you a question. You know, I look, I really, I'm often conflicted in a way where I'm kind of oscillating between that kind of monk lifestyle, being, an ascetic, and fasting, and I don't want any attachment. I don't want any attachment to anything, and also this realization that I have to live in the world.
Mm.
And I've often been and I often say, and I still do say it, it depends on the relationship you have with something, kind of similar to your friends, you know? Um, I think it depends on on your karma. And I think there are some emotions that you have more karma to work out in. So for me, it is lust. Like for me, it was lust. This is something very prevalent in my life and something that I have to, there's never been a stage in my life where I was kind of free of it until, very recently, probably about 3 years since I watched, pornography. So it was something that I had to work out myself. But for some people, they might not have any attachment to it. I'm sure there are men out there that kind of approach it in the same way that I might do drinking. I drink alcohol, but I've never been addicted to alcohol. I can
Yeah,
take it or leave it.
same.
I in fact, a part of me is, I mean, sometimes I don't understand it. Like I've never seen the personal attachment to it. But some people, I know people really, really struggle with alcohol. Oh, yes, they do. Oh, yes, they do. So for them, that's their personal karma to work out. How do I deal with this feeling that's probably a consequence of, not wanting to feel. Maybe it's anxious. I know a lot of people who are very, very anxious. Kind of, they drown themselves in the bottle. So it's all about. There's a lot of nuance in this from person to person and what your individual vice is and what you need to work out. Depends on your relationship with these things. In an ideal world, do I think would be completely free of all vices and attachment? I think that's probably the evolution of the human race. I think when I think about like long term, hundreds and thousands of years, where are we going? I really do see that the answer to our evolution is in some kind of integration of spirituality, like a real hive mind being, you know. Like I was listening to a podcast the other day on bees, and one of the beekeepers was saying it is wrong to think about a bee as an individual organism. Like if you see a bumblebee, oh, that's a bumblebee. That's one organism. That's not the way to see it. The hive mind is the organism because they're called bees drones. Drones are just part of the organism. So no longer, I think when I think about where we're going, it's no longer, oh, there's Michael, there's Joseph. That's a human being. That's a human being. No, that's part of this collective, and it goes back to this concept of we are God. We are
Mm.
God. So
No,
that
that's
went
that's good. It makes me think about, what are your thoughts on metaverse? That's where my mind went, right? This idea, because
um
I think, because I kind of share with what you're saying, that we're meant to evolve, but I think some people don't want to. So I think I almost see like there's this pull that people are going to accelerate into degeneration, and they will actually want more and more of that. Metaverse, yes, I want to be a slave.
Mhm.
And then there's another part that, want, and it's almost like they're a mirror of each other. So there's the
Mhm.
hive mind down here and there's the hive mind up here, that we are, it's the God and ego self. And I guess it can't, it's going to destroy itself.
Mhm.
It's
Mhm.
not sustainable. Yeah. So I don't,
Yeah, it's an interesting thought experiment, especially off the latter point that I think will become more collective. And the question has always been for me is the metaverse facilitating that, or is it going to be this destruction of that? Because the evidence suggests is when I do look online is that it's a place that makes people very combative.
mm,
I But there's a lot of good as well. I mean, we would have never met without the internet, and we are
yeah.
sharing values across the pond. And it's. I think when my skepticism comes is that I think I see more. Do I see more negative consequences of the internet than I do positive ones? And it's a difficult answer
Yeah.
to make. If there was nothing but positive reinforcement for what we're seeing, people are connecting, and there's no arguments, and the political breach, let's say, between the left and right was actually coming together more central than it was being more polarizing, then I actually think that the metaverse technology is going to be the glue that evolves us from singular people to this collective kind of consciousness mind. I really do see that. um but now,
Yeah, I think
we're
it's
definitely not
reflective
ready
of our
for it.
consciousness. I think
Yeah.
it's, I think one of the podcasts I did, it's, AI is a reflection of us. I've thought of the idea of divine intelligence too. Like, what's the opposite of artificial? It'd be divine intelligence, and I think that we are programming machine. We're programming all of, um, yeah, this is deep stuff, but, um,
I think maybe to kind of maybe try and push both of our thinking here, my thought is going to the point where, I mean, I don't think our consciousness has matured to the level at which we can program AI
mm,
computers with the knowledge of what we kind of preface this whole podcast in, is that am I the intention behind things like metaverse is usually greed, but is it come from a place of selflessness? No, I want to bring people together because I know that you and I are just God in masquerade right now. We're at a masquerade party, we're wearing different masks, and we're enjoying this little pantomime that we're separate, but in fact we're the same.
mm,
But is a programmer in Silicon Valley, are they all coming from that perspective? Have they seen behind the veil?
mm.
More than likely they haven't. So I think we still have a lot of maturation to do in respects to our consciousness level. And then, it might be the point where we're genuinely seeing that this is something that is going to bring us closer together instead of driving us apart.
Yeah, and I can't help but go back to think of like how painful that's going to be. And
Mm,
what I mean by that is that, one of the reasons I've had such more of an affinity of Christ is like, the idea of forgive them, they know not what they do. I mean, Christ's last two lines were, first, forgive them, they know not what they do, and it is done. So the two things I get from that, forgive them, they know not what they do, is now through, first of all, I mean, it's even if it's not, if you don't believe, I'm not even interested if people, I'm still growing. So, I might look back and change my view, but the historical figure of Christ, but even like just taking the idea of like the cross, they're going to crucify you. Okay. You see so much into the collective that you say, welcome death, because now what that does is it sets a match throughout time. That his, through them killing, they actually accelerated him to win, right? They're like, oh, you're going to lose because we're going to crucify you. And now we're going to use fear and guilt and shame for other people. So they don't speak truth. But what they did is they did the opposite. In their fear and panic, they crucified him and what that did is flip the switch on all the people around him seeing it, who saw the truth. And then that woke, like, it just, I look at it like that ripple effect throughout time.
Mm.
And now the idea of, like, I don't know, if the body of Christ, we are the body of Christ, right? I have the affinity with Christianity. I haven't studied enough religions to, I think there's common threads in it. I also think that there's ideas that people want to, the one world religion, which I'm opposed to, right? Because I
Mm.
think it's a flipping of that. It's like, oh, we're all going to come together. We're seeing that now, right? Where it's, love everybody, like no shame, no guilt. There's no bad way. There's no wrong way. And it goes back to what we were saying at the beginning. It's a paradox to be able to explain that, right? Because for those who are wearing the mask the most, they can be manipulated by others wearing the mask.
This is true. This is true. I mean, kind of goes back to what I was saying about many different paths to know where you're going. I would like to study more religions. Again, I'm certainly not proficient in all of them, but I find a continuity in the lessons between all of them. And ultimately, I mean, when I think about the idea of religion, it's just predicated on storytelling.
Mm.
And morals of the story. Or I had a way of phrasing this, but I kind of see religion as and scripture specifically as a kind of as kind of like a reflection of, I can't remember exactly how I phrased this. I phrased this better, but it's essentially, yeah, I really feel that they're kind of like cheat codes or little treasure or tips that you leave yourself in order to remember essentially what you are, right? And they're a reflection of kind of the historical lineage of all human beings. And irrespective of, again, the kind of mask that is the religion, let's say the characters of the story, it's what is the underpinning values to that unites us all. But if you're constantly focused on who's playing the characters, then you lose the value
It's
underneath.
character versus personality,
Right.
essentially,
Okay. Mm-hmm.
right? Is the character being, what are those universal values that make, see, uh, that's why David Hawkins' scale of consciousness, I think, it's literally the key. It's so that's everybody. That scale is everybody.
It's universal. That's what he's called.
I don't need to know Joseph. We've never met personally, but I know within you is guilt, shame, desire, apathy, and pride, courage, reason, love, joy. We're the same in that regard. What we're not the same is our persona, our subjective reality. That's going to be. Thank God for that. And like, as you said before, it's like we're all God and drag, right? Like, it's this idea that we're that, right? And I think, I guess that's the whole thing, right? The more you grow in that, that's how you can eliminate the personas, the personality attachment of other people. But, I wanted to branch off. That's why I think the pain it's like you have to be willing to embrace the pain, because the pain, Christ said something similar to the idea that, as things get more chaotic out there, this is obviously not an exact quote, but as things get more chaotic there, be more and more excited because the kingdom of heaven is at hand. So as it gets crazy, and that's what we're seeing now, right? It's up is down, down is up. Everything seems to be crazy. And there's something that says, get excited. It's a very small voice, but it's because it's all collapsing. And but thank God. I mean, is this what we want? This is the world that we want. The degeneration is collapsing. Attachment to ego is collapsing, and it's going to get loud. That's painful, though, because that means your friends, your family, they're going to say, no, you're wrong. And it's like being pushed into the corner, I guess. The ego is being pushed into the corner.
Sure. No, it's interesting to reflect on the social political climate at the moment, how tenuous it is, and how that may be a reflection of I don't know, is it spiritual evolution? Is it degeneration? Are the curtains going to close very, very soon? It's difficult to tell. Maybe it is all a grand paradox, maybe it is this idea that you kind of have that strong, what would you say? What's the chaos part of things? It's the yin, it's the feminine, it's the chaos, it's the disorder outside, but are you holding that yang inside? That kind of that composure, that peace, that tranquility, that stillness, and is this all gonna smash together, and we're gonna come together ultimately? Is this all an elaborate show of yoga, of the Tao, of coming back to Christ? It's difficult to say. I'd like it to be the case, but I don't know. I think we have a little bit more work to do before we
Yeah.
get to that stage of grand reunion.
Well, maybe that's a good place to end. I wanted to talk about polarity. It's
Mhm.
something that I've also been reflecting on. I see it in a lot of the Twitter spaces. Yin and the yang, masculine, feminine. You could say strong, weak, chaos, order. What is your view on polarity, especially between men and women? Women believing they are men now, men are believing they're women. This is more identity. Men doing masculinity instead of being masculine. I think that's what leads to that. Because if you're trying to do masculinity, look at me. I'm confident. So now
Mhm.
it's persona. So that's going to lead to not being able to. So if you could speak on polarity, because I think it is, how do we grow in polarity, but also realize that that is going to bring us together too?
Mm.
Does that make
Mm.
sense?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's a big question. I mean, first and foremost, I think as soon as you start to place a subjectivity on polarity, you start to lose, and that's kind of what we're seeing in the social political landscape of, you mentioned, men becoming more feminized and women becoming more typically masculinized. Um, I I see the conflation of that, and I mean, you see a lot of pain as a consequence of it. Women feel like there's this social narrative that they have to be, masculine, and that it's going to be in some way conducive to their happiness, to their well-being, to their prosperity. I think masculine traits are necessary in the world we live in for women. You can talk about the financial aspect of things, making a living, being able to pay for your house and your rent, your taxes, things like that. But I really do feel that there is something uncompromising about traditional values. I mean, when I look at my grandfather and my grandmother, they had the most beautiful relationship I've ever
Mm.
seen, you know, and it was that classic traditional relationship. He would be the breadwinner and she would be, more of the typical feminine role within the house. And they have a love that was, again, uncompromising, and their quality of life was also very, very, very high. um I mean, there's many. I know I'm centering in specifically on the kind of masculine and feminine dynamic in relationships, but I think there needs to be a return to, first of all, awareness, which has always been a key,
Yeah.
theme in our chat, is awareness that there are these two separate energies in the world. They do exist. They're not going away either. One of them isn't bad and one of them isn't good.
Mm.
They're just different. It's like saying that the sun is better than the moon. No, no, no. You need the moon to appreciate the sun, and you need the sun to appreciate the moon. Saying that one is more important than the other is uh, rationalization at the level of a child.
But
You know?
essentially, that's what we're doing when we speak about equality, right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean,
Men and
it's
women are the same, but
yeah,
it's in the
one hundred
differences that
percent.
bring us together.
100%. And that's where the pleasure and the joys of life really come through. And in fact, there's also something to be said. I mean, when I really, because I think the understanding of polarity raised my consciousness to the fact that you can't even have consciousness without polarity. You wouldn't
I'll
even
go
be
into
able to
that.
distinguish. You wouldn't even be able to experience the life you're living without the actualization that there are polar opposites in the world. Because
Yeah.
if let's do experiment, right? Like, say everybody who was watching this stood up, and you went very, very close to your wall and you just stared at the wall, right? Say the wall is white, right? And you would just, this is kind of Plato's allegory of the cave, right? If
Mm.
that's all you ever knew, that's all you ever knew was white, and you never have an acknowledgement of black, the concept of white wouldn't exist.
Mm.
So you have to have the other. If it was sunny 24 hours of the day, 365 days a week, then the concept of sun and light would not exist. You need the other. And I'm going back to the point that you're making about pain. In order for, you know, pleasure and joy to exist, the concept of it is only actualized through pain. That's the only way that you can understand it here. So polarity is necessary. It's necessary to have free will. That's an argument that people make often, is that, you know, in order to have any kind of control or jurisdiction in the world, you have to constantly making this oscillation between, again, I'm thinking here with the lights, between the blue and between the red, you know, between the light and between the dark. You have to have it. If those two, if you only had red, there would be no acknowledgement of this. So, and when I started to go through all the different, and again, you know, dualistic nature, up, down, left, right, you know, I became grateful for them. The ones that you perceive as being bad, that's the real trip, right? Is that here's a wild thought that people don't actually think, is that we talked about pornography, right? And people would think, oh, I have a very, very strict or condemning view of pornography, right? We need pornography. We need it. We do. We need pornography because it is going to be the system in which we recognize a life without it, right? Like we need, like, you can even tie this to yourself, like you need bad shit to happen to you. You need that shit. Like when I was addicted to pornography, I needed to be addicted because I would have no actualization of the pleasure and love and fulfillment and wholeness that I experience now, right? That's a wild way to think, but it's necessary. It's very, very necessary. And you can apply that to all facets of your life, like the darkest moments of your life. You need that shit. You need more of that shit to happen for you in order for you to keep elevating up to where you need to go. So polarity, it might be life's biggest lesson. It might be the lesson. And it's just a constant trip. It's just a constant oscillation. So polarity, it's everything. And the end of things is when they come together, and that's yoga. That's where the curtains close, where everything ends. We come back to divine mind. That's it.
Yeah, and I think that's
happen, by the way.
That's you know, I think that's also the key to the next generation. The more the polarity, the more that stronger bond, especially in the sexual arena. You know, the more a man, that's why I say more a man is a man, not does, like does masculinity. Because I went through that phase. That was by, you know, as I said earlier, it was nice guy Michael to bad boy Michael. I mean, say the idea is the nice guy Michael was, I was doing it because I wanted attention. Oh, here's flowers. It's Then bad boy was, I don't care at all. I'm not gonna text them back, or I'm not gonna, you know, I'm gonna do this because then they're gonna be thinking so much. I'm playing games. Versus being Michael or being Joseph. It's so damn hard to articulate, because that's why it's, you know, the heaven quote comes back to mind, right? Seek first the kingdom of heaven. So to be a man is to be at peace.
That's it.
It's because then everything naturally comes out of that, the testosterone and all that. They say stress messes up the testosterone, one of the biggest things. And, you know, I think that might be one of the biggest things that screws up testosterone. You have to take all these supplements and all this. You talk about fasting, right? Fasting might be, you know, you think you have to do all these. I've done all the things. I've worked at GNC. I've worked at gyms. I've seen it, you know, and to me, I think for people who are listening who want, you know, testosterone advice, stress is the biggest thing. I really think that. So any thoughts on that?
If you want to increase testosterone, you've got to get rid of cortisol. That's another balancing act, that you have to make. I mean, it's funny, just on the theme of polarity and dualism, is that you have lessons in all these things, like mini lessons of these things. I mean, you mentioned again being all the way on the good side, the good boy, then all the way to the bad side. Then it's how do I meet myself in the middle? With with testosterone, that's a balancing act between, because they have an inverse relationship. Testosterone is kind of like the yang aspect of things. Let's say, again, I'm using the lights here, it's a good analogy, but you got heightened testosterone over here, yang, go get them, good, do them. But also, here's another trick, is that too much testosterone is an issue, is a problem. So it's how do I balance, like cortisol? Like, you don't want no cortisol, you don't want that shit, right? Because then you'll just be a fucking raging bull, getting into fights all the time and making a mess of your life. So again, back to my point, you need both. You need good amounts of healthy testosterone and good amounts of healthy cortisol. Most people, though, are kind of fluctuating here, so much stress, apathy, depression, negative emotion, and they don't have zeal, vigor, that kind of masculine essence to go and have drive in their lives. So it's, again, how do I get right here? How do I get right here? It's all a balancing act. And that was, I think, the first thing that we talked about in this podcast, is that the answer to self-realization is a balancing act of the polarities that you experience in life. That's all it is. And that's how you get back to home. That's how you walk, with the Tao. It's not too much of one thing and too little of another. It is just the right amount to where you come back home.
Makes me think of bipolar. Every time I heard that word, it didn't be bipolar. You hear that as, it makes me think of like all of the things that we do with depression, anxiety, taking a pill. It also, that to me seems like the whole thing with drugs, alcohol, pharmaceuticals. It's all, we're not experiencing that polarity because it's scary as shit. I really think that. I really think that, because I think of like Alan Watts. It's like we're putting that, you've put out tweets like, and you've said it, when we've spoken off, you have to be dangerous. You have to be dangerous. It's a Jordan Peterson thing, right? You have to be willing to be absolutely dangerous, and then being able to, I don't want to say suppress it, but be able to not act on it. You're responsible with your danger. Because otherwise you're just weak. You're not a formidable force.
Comes through the exploration of some of the extremes ends of that polarity. I mean, some of the greatest lessons, I mean, especially in health, I like to tie this back to health, because health is something I think that we can all mutually agree upon is a good thing. In order to have good health, you have to, I mean, I'm thinking of like cold and hot therapy, like cold showers fucking suck. They are painful. People do not want to do them. But there's a huge, balancing act of them. Same thing with the sauna. People, if you stay in the sauna too long, it's very uncomfortable to kind of deal with that heat. But there are lessons kind of in the extreme elements. But to be dangerous is to have the courage to go into them. You have to have the courage to turn that shower freezing fucking cold. I'm doing a lot of I live on the south coast of England, so I'm doing a lot of dips in the ocean right now, and it is fucking cold, right? Like, yeah, like paralyzingly cold. And I don't want to do it every single time. I get right up, 7 o'clock in the morning. It's dark, it's miserable. Like the sea's black. And I'm thinking, I do not want to fucking go in here. That is the worst thing I want to do. But you need to be dangerous. You need to explore this area.
Yeah. See, when you do that, when I do that, like the cold showers or, going on those really pushing through workouts, that's why I say the pain before that to me is reflective of dealing with the ignorance of the world.
Sure.
That's the painful side, right? So every time you go into the ocean or you confront that painful part, even if it's someone, again, speaking with people who are on a different path of the journey, they're so deep in porn, they're listening to this conversation. You're going into the ocean or not, or taking a cold shower can just be not watching porn for a few days.
Yeah.
That could be just the same because you've conditioned your brain so much. Because I remember, when I was watching, man, I was scouring the internet for just people who understood where I was coming from. I didn't want to go to a therapist, be like, tell me how you're feeling. Oh, that's an issue. And it's like, no, I want to speak with someone who is going through that experience. Again, it's mask, right? You're a mask with the therapist. I want to go through somebody. I want to speak with people who have gone through it.
Mm-hmm.
I want to speak with, like if I go to a church, I want to speak with somebody who has, who can give me relationship advice because they've been in a relationship, and it's not to dismiss somebody. It's not that people can't give advice, but it's the lived experience that I was looking for. So, that to me, that ocean, that's the first thing I thought of, right? When you're doing those hard things, I often will reflect on people in my life who, and I say that I say this not trying to be arrogant, as if I don't know it all. Because disclaimer, I don't know it all, and I know how little I know. I truly do. But when I'm around people who really they think they have it figured out, trust the science comes to mind. Trust the science. This scientist knows. Really? You, when I'm surrounded by people who know, they think they know so much, how do I humble them without humbling them?
I don't think you can. I think, part I think part of what leads to them getting where they need to be in terms of a spiritual evolution is just being is trying to sit in that truth. I really do think, because it's not as simple as maybe asking the question. Let's say, have you considered that you may be wrong in this situation? Have you considered that this may be, inaccurate or misleading? Sometimes it isn't as simple as that. Sometimes, and it won't come in the way that you want. That they'll go, oh, you know what, Michael, you are correct. I have been very, very arrogant and blunt. Like, that is rarely what happens. What really happens is that you get somebody into an emotional state where they are provoked and they have to deal with that emotion. I talked to you about this. Is that's kind of what my tweets do. Is that people think that the reaction I want is that reaction when let's say I tweet about pornography and I say, oh, pornography is a toxic scold on modern Western culture. You should get rid of it now. Like, the last thing I want, or the last thing I think is the reaction to that is, by Joe, I think he's right. I think he's right. What I want for people to read when they say that is fuck you. What are you talking about? Fuck you. What do you mean you know it all? That's bullshit. I'm fine. I'm good. I'm by myself. I can watch porn. I can function well, And then what will happen is a couple of weeks later is that tweet will come back. And I'll start thinking, why am I not as happy as I thought I was? Why can I not get a long-term relationship with somebody? Why am I just fucking all these women, but I just feel so goddamn empty inside? Why is that the case? And it'll keep popping up. It may take years. That's what happened to me, because that was my initial reaction. It was, fuck you. You are wrong. You don't know shit. My life's great. So it never happens in the way that you think it's going to happen. You just have to, again, and speak your truth, what you think is right in this particular moment of your life. And in some way or form, that will be a seed that gestates into the catalyst for somebody getting where they need to go.
Well said. I think it'd be a good place to end. Any closing thoughts? And I'd like to, and I think we already shared, but for
I think
to speak to other men
pretty
on
comprehensive.
overcoming. Yeah. Because that was something I always, when I would watch podcasts, or I went through a phase where I watched so many documentaries, I was always left with this sense of like, yeah, but what can I do? Right? It's like,
Mhm.
global warming, not even getting into that, but the all of these chaos, the coral reefs are gone, and and
Yeah.
all these things. And then you're just left there like, well, I hope it works out. I
Mm,
didn't leave with that sense of empowerment. What,
mm.
maybe what can men do who are struggling or,
Sure. So I'll offer sometimes I think sometimes we can think that insight isn't going to be conducive to making those changes. It definitely is. So even if you don't do anything here, you all, if you made it this far, you all have the knowledge that you all have the insight and the different perspectives of where we're kind of coming from here, and that's how it starts. That's how everything starts. It's a change in your belief system and how you're viewing the world, and it's the most important thing that you can expose yourself to more and more if you're hoping for change. Practical stuff for me is self-reflection. The most important practice that any man can do is some kind of self-reflective practice every single day. We talked about in the start how I'm always trying to kind of sit in that truth every single day. And what's actually happening is when you are meditating, maybe when you're praying, maybe when you're just maybe journaling by yourself, is you begin to exercise the muscles of introspection. You better become sensitive to the emotions that you're feeling in any given moment. And you start to build that distance, that separateness between you, the observer, and the emotion that is arising in you at that given moment. And the more you can sit in the seat of the observer and you can see desire, lust, horniness, anger, rage arise in you. And the more you can identify with this, as opposed to letting anger, lust drive the car that you are in and you sit in the back seat, the more you have control over your life. And this doesn't come easy. You have to dedicate yourself to doing this every single day. So how I started was meditating 5 minutes before bed every single day. 5 minutes turned into 10, into 15. And then I do a healthy, 20 and 15 pretty much every single day. And I come back to that truth. If not meditation, I mentioned prayer. If not prayer, journaling. Just try and focus your attention on one thing. People can meditate when they're washing the dishes, but you just have to wash the dishes. Can't listen to shit. Can't be talking to somebody else. Just wash the fucking dishes. Do one thing at a time. And that's my best advice.
Before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water, right?
Keep it simple, stupid.
Where can people find you?
You can find me on YouTube at Masculine Theory. You can find me on Twitter at Masculine Theory. You can find me on Instagram at The Masculine Theory. You can also join my Discord, links of which are you could probably find on those socials.
Yeah, I'll put them in description here. Joseph, thanks for
Awesome, man.
joining me, brother.
Michael, pleasure as always.